The Senate will come to order. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Senators Bridges, Buckner, Coleman, Cook, Coram,
Excused.
Danielson,
Good morning.
Donovan, Fields, Senator Fields,
Excused.
Gardner, Janal, Gonzalez, Hanson, Henriksen, Heisey, Holbert, Jaquez Lewis, Kirkmeyer, Kolker, Lee, Liston, Lundeen, Moreno, Priola, Rankin,
Excused.
Rodriguez, Scott,
Here.
Simpson, Smallwood, Sonnenberg, Story,
Here.
Winter, Woodward,
Here.
Zenzinger. Mr. President. Oh. Senator Fields.
Here.
Mr. President.
Here. The morning roll call is 33 present, 0 absent, 2 excused. We have a quorum. Will the good senator from Aurora please lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
Good morning. Please join me in the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Approval of the Journal Center Priola.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move the reading of the Journal of Monday, March 28th, 2022 be dispensed with and that the Journal be approved as corrected by the Secretary.
You have heard the motion. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed, no. The ayes have it, and that motion is adopted. Senate Services.
Correctly printed Senate Bills 181, 182, 183, and 184. Correctly engrossed Senate Bill 97. Correctly revised House Bill 1049 and 1209. Correctly re-revised House Bill 1008, 1024, and 1060.
Committee reports.
March 28, 2022, the Committee on Health and Human Services, after consideration on the merits, the committee recommends the following. House Bill 1214 be referred to the Committee of the Whole with favorable recommendation. March 28, 2022, Committee on Health and Human Services, after consideration on the merits, the committee recommends the following. House Bill 1227 be referred to the Committee of the Whole with favorable recommendation and with a recommendation that it be placed on the consent calendar. March 28, 2022, the Committee on Health and Human Services has had under consideration and has had a hearing on the following appointments and recommends that the appointments be placed on the consent calendar. Confirm members of the Colorado Traumatic Brain Injury Trust Fund Board effective July 1st, 2021 for terms expiring on June 30th, 2024. Kenneth Anderson Scott, MPH, PhD of Denver, Colorado, reappointed. March 28, 2022, the Committee on Business, Labor, and Technology, after consideration on the merits, the committee recommends the following. House Bill 1262 be referred to the Committee of the Whole with favorable recommendation with a recommendation that be placed on the consent calendar. March 28, 2022, the Committee on Business, Labor, and Technology, after consideration on the merits, the committee recommends the following. Senate Bill 157 be amended as follows, and as so amended be referred to the Committee of the Whole with favorable recommendation and with the recommendation be placed on the consent calendar.
Introduction of bills.
Senate Bill 185, Senators Danielson and Buckner, concerning addressing the needs of older Coloradans through the Strategic Investment in Aging Grant Program.
Health and Human Services.
Senate Bill 186, Senators Janal and Simpson, Representatives Mullica and McKean, concerning the creation of a council to advise the state about issues related to persons living with rare diseases.
Health and Human Services.
Senate Bill 187, Senator Danielson, concerning state assistance to programs that assist in attempting to locate persons who wandered in connection therewith, restructuring a grant program that assists local governments or their designees in locating persons with medical conditions such as Alzheimer's disease, related dementias, autism, brain injury, developmental, cognitive, neurological, chromosomal disorders that may cause them to wander.
Health and Human Services.
Senate Bill 188, Senators Fields and Quorum, Representatives Robertson to Tone, concerning behavioral health support for advocates in the criminal justice system.
Judiciary.
Senate Bill 189, Senators Danielson and Pedersen, concerning creating the Colorado Multidisciplinary Geriatric Provider Pipeline Program to support the health care of medically compromised older Coloradans.
Health and Human Services.
Senate Bill 190, Senator Danielson, concerning the creation of a United States Space Force special license plate.
Finance.
Senate Bill 191, Senators Bridges and Perillo, Representatives Titone and Burnett, concerning the procurement of information technology resources.
Business, Labor, and Technology.
House Bill 1157, Representatives McCormick, Senator Hawkes Lewis, concerning the utilization of the demographic health data by the Department of Public Health and Environment to address health inequities and in connection therewith, making an appropriation.
Health and Human Services.
House Bill 1213, Representatives Young and Pico, Senator Buckner, concerning the continuation of the regulation of speech-language pathologists by the Director of the Division of Professions and Occupations in the Department of Regulatory Agencies and in connection therewith, implementing the recommendations in the Department's set review.
Finance.
House Bill 1217, Representatives Benavides and Bockenfeld, Senator Janal, concerning measures to prevent catalytic converter theft and in connection therewith, making an appropriation.
Judiciary.
House Bill 1234, Representatives Bacon and Michelson Janae, Senators Rodriguez, concerning establishing a preventing identity-based violence grant program and in connection therewith, making an appropriation.
Judiciary.
House Bill 1272, Representative Gonzalez Gutierrez and Benavides, Senators Gonzalez and Rodriguez, concerning the repeal of the provision awarding a defendant attorney's fees in a tort action when the case is dismissed on motion of the defendant prior to trial.
Judiciary.
House Bill 1292, Representative Lindsay, Senator Hawkes Lewis, concerning expanding the uses of money in the state dental loan repayment fund to include oral health programs administered by the Department of Public Health and Environment.
Health and Human Services. Third reading of bills, consent. Will the clerk please read the titles to all the bills on the consent calendar?
House Bill 1209, Representatives Bradfield and Young, Senator Woodward, concerning the continuation of the Strategic Action Planning Group on Aging and connection therewith, implementing the recommendation contained in the 2021 Sunset Report by the Department of Regulatory Agencies to set the Strategic Action Planning Group on Aging.
Majority Leader Moreno.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move for the passage of the one bill on the third reading consent calendar, which is House Bill 1209.
Is there any discussion on the bill on the consent calendar? Seeing none, the motion is the passage of the bill on the third reading of bill's consent calendar. Are there any no votes on the bill on the third reading of bill consent calendar? With a vote of 33 ayes, 0 noes, 0 absent, 2 excused, House Bill 1209 is passed. Co-sponsors. Senators Zenzinger, third reading of bills, final passage. Will the clerk please read the title to Senate Bill 53?
Senate Bill 53 by Senator Sonnenberg, Representative Pelton, concerning visitation rights at healthcare facilities and in connection therewith, making an appropriation.
Senator Sonnenberg.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move Senate Bill 53 on third reading and final passage. Members, many of you were not at the second reading or heard the discussion, so I'm going to briefly talk a little bit about how that conversation went. We talked about the number of people that testified in committee. And when they testified in committee, they shared stories about how they watched their spouse die over an iPad, on the screen of an iPad. One of the most compelling ones was when a family had a 2-year-old boy that was not feeling well. Then all of a sudden, this 2-year-old boy had a seizure. So they rushed him to the hospital, and the hospital put him on a helicopter and flew him to Denver. And knowing that it would take 2.5 hours for this family to get to Denver, they called a family member that lived up here and said, "Can you meet Ben at the hospital?" So he has some face or person that is there to greet him that people know, that he knows, that he would feel comfortable with. The hospital said no. So an hour and a half later, when the parents actually got there and Ben had arrived to the hospital without a familiar face for this 26-month-old boy, when the family finally got there, he was non-responsive. That means the family never did get to see him after they left the hospital to put him on the helicopter. That boy never was able to have confidence that somebody was with him that he loved, that he trusted. People, that's not right. It's just not right. You've all heard the stories of spouses that have died alone because they weren't allowed visitors. You've also heard stories from people that died because they gave up the will to live because of lack of social interaction. In other words, a broken heart. So how did we craft this bill to meet the safety needs of these healthcare facilities and the needs of patients to have their Bill of Rights honored? We crafted it in such a way where we put in the Medicare and Medicaid guidelines that they asked for. We put in the amendment that allowed for hospitals to set up screenings, to set up policies and procedures. And if that policy and procedures include a hazmat uniform, so be it. Families are okay with that. Families just want to hold the hands of their loved ones. We did all these things that they had asked for and they brought up in committee. And then, of course, you have all been lobbied fairly hard that they just can't get there. I'm asking you to get there. To choose family over bureaucratic regulations. This is a compromise that helps families and still preserves the safety of hospitals. Ask for your aye vote.
Minority Leader Holbert.
Thank you, Mr. President. I also ask for your support and proudly rise in support of this bill. I had committed to the good senator and informed members of the lobby that I would be a yes vote on this bill on second reading. I didn't anticipate arguing so assertively for the bill. But when the sponsor, my friend from Sterling, explained that the industry had objections, and he went through the bill, page, line item, this objection, addressed it. Next objection, addressed it. Over and over and over again. And after exhausting all of the objections, satisfying all of their concerns, the bottom line was, they're still opposed. Now, we've had some bills where amendments have been offered. I think of one just last week. The Senate President was the sponsor of the bill. Amendments that my caucus and I welcomed and supported, with the understanding that we would still be a no vote on the bill. And those kinds of negotiations occur. But there's also a point where you have to ask, how much? How far do you have to go? When there's multiple objections to a bill and the bill sponsor addresses all of those objections to the very best of his ability, and then the stakeholder says, we don't really have a reason to point to, but we're still opposed, that's disappointing. That's when I decided that I was going to come up here and tell my stories. Madam President Pro Tem, I want to thank you, friend, for sharing your story. The good senator from Denver, thank you for sharing your stories. You've had more tragedy in your family than I think any other member. Members, if you shared your stories and you are supporting this bill, I want to thank you for your words on second reading, because that was the proudest moment of this session. That's when we started thinking together about the people that we represent, and not so much about what different stakeholders want or don't want, not among majority or minority leader or party, majority or minority caucus positions, perspectives, party platforms, whatever. We were here as human beings, sharing human experience about people we love, about constituents we represent and the people who they love. I shared a story of a friend who contacted me during the first year of COVID, alarmed, in a panic. Her grandparents married 50 years. He was dying, and she wanted to be in the room with him. In that covenant relationship for 50 years, and told, no, you can't be with him. I can't speak for my friend, I can't speak for her grandparents, but the impression that I got was that if it cost her her life, she wanted to be there for his last breath, to hold his hand, to be that comfort, that companion. Who knows what trials they'd gone through, what celebrations, the births of children, the deaths of relatives. But she was told, no, you can't be in the room. I shared my own story a few years ago. My wife slipped and fell on ice and broke both of her arms. She was in enormous pain, a bone sticking out of the flesh on one arm. She finally got morphine or something like that in the hospital, and then a technician came in and rather curtly told me to leave the room. I have power of attorney to be in that room. I have power of attorney to make decisions for my wife when she's not able to, and she has the same for me. Not everyone is like that, but when it comes to my wife and I, we are one. And I was not happy with that person. To me, the threat was to have the two security guards outside the room who were armed with tasers zap me. But when he had to explain that to the CEO of the hospital, it was like, oh, no, it was the x-ray machine. Didn't want the husband to be subjected to the x-ray machine. I don't understand why his words were, sir, you need to leave the room or I'll have you zapped. I'm not sure why he said it that way, but that's what he said. Standing in front of a sign that made it very clear that patients in that hospital were obligated to follow the instructions of medical personnel. No, We've only been together for 38 years, coming up on 35 years of marriage. No, I'm going to be in that room with my wife until I decide I'm not going to be in that room, like it or not. I eventually got an apology out of the CEO from that hospital, not because I have one of these name badges and my title of senator, but because I have that legal document to be in that room and represent my wife. And she has the same for me. They didn't like that very much, but if you don't have that document and you have someone in your life who you trust to make decisions, I encourage you to go talk to a simple country lawyer, one of them from El Paso County or another, and get that document. But not everyone has that. And the past 2 years have brought us so much tragedy, COVID-related. Grandparents, parents, children, aunts, uncles, neighbors, whoever, loved ones who have passed with no one there at their side. I understand liability. I understand that this might be a risk for hospitals. I understand. And my friend from Sterling went so far as to say, even if the family member needs to pay for a hazmat suit and go in, sign a document releasing liability, okay, but you can't tell them they can't go in. You can't do that. Not on my watch. And I pray that you would see it the same, not on yours. Friends, if you are supporting this bill, I am proud to stand with you. I am more proud on this bill. And as my friend from Sterling explained, in his 16 years in the General Assembly, this bill is the most important bill he's ever sponsored. For him, this is the most important policy change he's ever proposed. He's proposed a lot of them. Some I've supported, some I haven't. But on this one, I'm proud to be with you, Senator, and I'm proud to be with you, Senator. I'm proud to be with you, Senator. All who are supporting this, I'm proud to be with you. I ask for an aye vote. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Heisey.
Thank you, Mr. President. So long as you know my family, we'll just go ahead and read from my daughter that's the nurse that most of you feel like you know by now. Sent her a text after I spoke the last time. And so this is what she came back with, and she is in another state. This whole time, except for the very beginning of the pandemic, we have been allowing visitors for end-of-life patients. We actually have a No One Dies Alone program, which we have had for 20 years, where a volunteer sits with the patient the entire time they are dying. I fully support not letting anyone die alone. Visitors have been very good at following instructions on hand washing and PPE. It is not humane to make nurses be the only company someone gets on their way out of this world. Sorry, when you have a touch screen, when you touch it, things happen. In Oregon, we are now allowing visitors, as many visitors as wanted, only just one at a time. It has made such a positive difference for our patients and for the worried visitors, and has reduced the emotional and physical burden on the nurses more than we knew. So, while my good friend from Sterling is persuasive, a text from my daughter trumps his abilities, just a simple text. I will be voting yes on this bill. I still have the concerns that I expressed on seconds. What I would like to see happen with this bill is for it, assuming it gets out of this chamber, I would like to see it sit in the House for about 3 weeks, maybe 4. And yes, I do realize where we are in the session, and give the hospitals a chance to put their own protocols in place. They can move that quickly if they want to. But I'll be voting yes today.
Senator Priola.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members, I rise in opposition of Senate Bill 53. As many of you may or not know, I've had a lot of conversations through the years with a lot of people in my House and Senate district. And a number of issues would usually crop to the top when asked what was on their mind or what was concerning of them. Of course, education was a big one. Roads, traffic was one that, especially in 2016, started bubbling to the top. But consistently, for all of those years, other than education, healthcare costs. Healthcare costs was one of the top concerns of most everyone I spoke with, especially if they were over 40. Let's put it that way. If they're over 40, it was a huge issue. I realized through amendments, and I compliment the sponsors for working on them, that the bill has been blunted in many ways, but it still, in my opinion, leaves a giant invitation to litigation, which will raise healthcare costs, will bind families up in courtrooms probably during the next pandemic or whatever natural disaster or what issue is stressing the healthcare industry. Speaking of hospitals, I read a very interesting story yesterday about, there's a lot going on in Ukraine right now, and one thing that was found out is somehow some other hackers hacked the Russian hackers, and they found out a plot that they had a few years ago to try to shut down most of the hospitals in the United States and create chaos. That was their words, create chaos. And if you want to search this term, it was TricksterBot was the Russian hacking group. I could find the article if you want me to find it for you. But it underlies how important our healthcare infrastructure is in all of our lives, in all of our health. And given the fact that COVID-19 around the world only had a mortality rate of under 2%, who's to say that the next global pandemic doesn't have a mortality rate of 80%? And in the early days of that new global pandemic, hopefully it's many, many generations from now, there is arguments and lawyers and back and forth over something put in statute that muddies the water, that takes away the professionals, the doctors who went to school for a decade and incurred hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt, the nurses who put their lives on the line day in and day out, and I've had many conversations with them in the prior years for this most recent COVID pandemic. That, in my opinion, is why I can't vote for this. It simply, to me, creates more problems than whatever problem it tries to solve. I understand this is a very populist issue right now. I, too, have a personal story related to this. My father is immunocompromised. He had a kidney donated from my sister many years ago. And during this pandemic, although I live 3 or 4 miles from him, to respect his health, we didn't go over and hang out, and we didn't have Christmas and invite him over. And when I did see him, I stayed as far as away from him in the Good Center from Jefferson County over there in the middle of the row. I would get no closer than 12 feet from him outside, because I didn't want, indirectly or directly, to be the reason my father contracted COVID or some other communicable disease, because he's in his mid-70s and passed away. I know that if this bill is signed into law and utilized, that the person in the hazmat suit or whatever process that's causing our healthcare insurance rates to rise and taking a lot of valuable time from doctors and nurses to care for other people recovering from traffic accidents and heart attacks, so on and so forth. I know that they're going to be walking by people in other rooms that might be immunocompromised, and they may not want to spread infectious disease to them, but it's a possibility. My father actually almost died. He got in a car accident in his late teens, early 20s, and he contracted staph infection, which, as many of you know, is pretty common in hospitals. And to this day, he has a giant hole in his side from where the staph ate away at him, and I forget what they had to, it was in the mid-60s, so the medical technology back then was nowhere near what it is today. So there are many reasons in my mind to vote against this, for the greater good, for the healthcare dollars that will be used, the increased insurance rates, the increased litigation, the stress on the first responders, the stress on the doctors and nurses and hospital staff. And I get it. I get it. This is a very populist issue to support, especially now on the back end of a pandemic. But it takes away, in my opinion, and muddies the water on the flexibility that these true professionals who create miracles day in and day out perform for all of our health. Again, I ask for a no vote on Senate Bill 53.
Senator Gonzalez.
Thank you, Mr. President. When I heard the testimony in the Senate State Affairs Committee, the image that kept coming to my mind was the image of one of the protests from right at the onset of the pandemic. You all may remember this image. It went viral, not just here in Colorado, but nationally. There was a protest that had been organized from conservative activists. End the shutdown, reopen government, I want a haircut. And there was a nurse who stood in the street in scrubs and stood with their hands on their hips. You all may remember this image. And there was this nurse standing right in the crosswalk of a street, and a big 4x4 truck with a banner on it saying "Land of the Free," and a woman like literally halfway outside of the window screaming at this healthcare worker. That image went viral because when we were faced with this threat of a pandemic, there were those of us in this country, in this state, in this chamber, who didn't take it seriously. I'm reminded of that quote that your liberty to swing a fist ends at my face. You all have heard the stories of people who have been impacted as a consequence of this pandemic. Sometimes they died alone because of COVID, and sometimes they died alone, not due to COVID, but because the case counts were so high that hospitals and healthcare workers made the unthinkable decision to limit who could access, who could step in. Y'all know that I've had to go through this. Y'all know that I've lived this policy in a visceral way. But you'll also know that this January, at my oldest brother's funeral, after he died the day after Christmas, at his funeral, there were folks who said, "Oh, I'm sorry to hear you had the flu." Folks who still want to believe that this pandemic wasn't real and that any of the health measures that were put in place were some government overreach, were some infringement upon their liberty. Actions have consequences. And because we as Americans did not take this pandemic seriously enough at the onset, we're approaching 1 million Americans dead. We could have made a different set of decisions that would have led to a different set of outcomes. And instead, far too many Americans chose not to take this virus seriously. And here we are. I move this bill forward because I think it's important for us to have this conversation. Because as we as a state attempt to recover, attempt to heal, attempt to move forward, next week this chamber is going to be debating a budget that seeks to help us as a state recover and heal. But also part of this conversation is that we as a chamber, we as Coloradans, ought to reckon with the consequences of our actions. You'll remember this chamber at one point had plastic dividers. At one point, everyone in this chamber was masked up. Just kidding. That never happened. Too many Coloradans had to die alone because not enough of us as leaders took this virus seriously. But now, because we've heard the pleas from Coloradans who mourn those precious moments lost with their loved ones, now we want to ensure that nobody has to die alone. It's cold comfort for those of us who have to visit grave sites. I would have given anything to have this conversation 2 years ago. But here we are. Thank you, colleagues.
Senator Winter.
Thank you, Mr. President. This is one of the harder votes I've taken in my legislative career. And I want to give a little bit of background. My dad is a nurse and showed up every single day to work and told the stories of being a nurse. Sometimes he'd tell stories about feces or other things being thrown on him and what he faced. He actually was assaulted by several patients during his time as a nurse. And recently he was hospitalized in January. And my sister and I had to coordinate who got to visit him because he got one visitor a day. So, and I love my sister, but when making medical decisions, it was difficult because I'm the one that had to understand what medical professionals were saying, and it was a challenging time. So I talked to my dad. As working in the medical profession for 20 years and being exposed to various problems from patients and pandemics and his protections, and from the time I was little to the time I was older, the protections he was afforded increased. And I talked to him about this bill. And he agreed, no one should die alone. No one should die without someone with them. And at the same time, he wouldn't have been a nurse if he wasn't afforded this protection. I've talked to the medical providers. I've talked to the hospitals. They're changing their protocols. I think they're doing the best they can. And at the same time, we have to recognize pandemics. We have to recognize what they are. And to ask our healthcare professionals to go in every single day and face patients and put themselves at risk for every single worker in those hospitals, that's difficult. So I've faced both sides of this issue from a very personal place. And ultimately, we have to trust the scientists to do what scientists do. We have to trust the healthcare professionals to do what the healthcare professionals do and understand that there is compassion in the decisions they make. And I don't think we can predict the future in the way that makes sense to put this into statute, and I'll be voting no.
Senator Sonnenberg.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator from Westminster, I appreciate what you had to say. You were fortunate you got to visit your father in January, a year ago. If this would have happened, be interesting to see how that would have played out. Senator from Fountain, thank you. It's interesting that Oregon recognizes the importance of being able to have a loved one next to you in your recovery. And we talk about the science. Why is the science, the so-called science, different in Oregon than it is in Colorado? Or quite frankly, why is it different in one hospital in Colorado than a different hospital in Colorado? I understand that there were some hospitals that actually allowed people to hold their loved one's hands in the last few hours of one's life. How is that science different than the hospital that said, no, you can't have anybody see that 26-month-old little boy before he became unresponsive? You know, God bless the healthcare workers. Absolutely, they are the heroes through this pandemic. They went to work each and every day. I can't thank them enough for the work that they did. But let's also keep in mind that those same healthcare workers, when they left the hospital, they went to the same parent-teacher conferences, the same school events, the same restaurants, the same grocery stores as those other people that wanted to follow all the regulations you want to put in place just to see a loved one. We heard doctors testified about the benefit of having a loved one next to you. And we heard at this microphone just a few minutes ago the talking points from the hospital. It's going to raise your rates. Oh, okay. So what has driven the cost of health care so high over the last 20 years? It obviously hasn't been this. We can make that argument. And if I'm the hospitals, absolutely. I want to scare you that it's going to cost you more for your health care. And you should not have to pay more, and we're going to keep you from your loved one so you don't have to pay more. Let me end with this. Members, it's a simple choice. The simple choice is, do we want to listen to the doctors that said that being next to a loved one is actually helpful in making them well, in comforting a dying spouse? Do we want to allow families to become and stay families till death do us part? Or do we want to side with an industry, hospitals that can't even get on the same page on what this should look like? My answer is, let's side with the families. Ask for your aye vote.
The motion is the passage of Senate Bill 53. Are there any no votes? Senators Liston, Priola, Coleman, Hansen, Zenzinger, Buckner, Winter, Danielson, Fields, please add the president. With a vote of 23 ayes, 10 no, 0 absent, 2 excused, Senate Bill 53 is passed. Co-sponsors, Senators Donovan, Minority Leader Holbert, Cook, Smallwood, Kirkmeyer, Simpson, Lundin, Woodward, Scott, will the clerk please read the title to House Bill 1168?
House Bill 1168, Representatives McKean and Mullica, Senators Woodward and Janelle, concerning permitting public schools to provide a Hunter education course to 7th grade students.
Senator Chanel.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move House Bill 1168 on third reading and final passage and ask for an aye vote.
Is there further discussion? The motion is the passage. Senator Fields.
Thank you, Mr. President and colleagues. Good morning. I cannot support House Bill 1168. I'm in opposition. I oppose this House Bill 1168. But I want to explain why. But first of all, I want to say that I support Hunter Education Program. I think it has its value. I think it has its place. And I've done a little research, and I know that this state Hunter's Education Program has been around for a long time. It's really easy to access it. You can go online, you can take the course. Typically, it takes about 10 hours to do the class. They say on the online, it's 2 days. They split it in half, 5 and 5. And then at the end of the course, you take a test, and then it comes with a hunter's license as well. So you're able to get the safety course, you get to take the exam, and then you get a hunting license to be able to hunt in the state of Colorado. I think that's a good thing. And Colorado is known for the hunting that takes place in our state. It's also known for a lot of good things that we do as it relates to open parks and recreation. We have skiing, we have rafting, we have mountain climbing, we have just a whole host of outdoor activities. And it doesn't require you to get a license to participate in the great outdoors. But what I did find out in my research is that most of the people that are hunting in Colorado are from out of state. We have a huge population of people who come from out of state to hunt in Colorado. I also discovered online that because I represent the state of Colorado, we are seeing a decline in revenue as it relates to hunting license in the state of Colorado. So this state-funded program that Colorado Parks and Wildlife is providing, they're not seeing the revenue. In fact, the revenue and the license have dropped. I believe that any kind of training involving guns should not take place on school property as curriculum, elective or not. I want to see our schools produce the next chemist, the next scientist, the next architect, the next teacher, doctor, lawyer. If the Department of Parks and Wildlife is having an issue with the lack of people in the state of Colorado buying a hunter's license or getting a hunter's license, why do they need to promote the next generation of hunters in our schools to protect their revenue? That doesn't sound like a good pathway moving forward. It might be a good business model to attract and promote young people to hunt, to address your decline in registration fees as it relates to hunting. But is that is that what we really want to be promoting students? I've heard lots of my colleagues talk about, well, this is gun safety. Well, did you read the title of the bill? The bill does not say gun safety. It says public schools hunting education, 7th grade course. Well, we know that's been modified. The bill does not say gun safety. But I can tell you as a common practice, in our schools. We have kids that have to do these active shooting drills where they have to hunker either under their desk or in the corner of the classroom. Colorado has not been spared as it relates to mass shootings, not only in our schools, but in our community. The law is clear. Look at the statute. And the statute says that you're not allowed to carry a gun or have possession of a gun, whether it's loaded, unloaded, fake or real. Everybody knows that. You don't bring a gun on school property. But yet, Colorado Park and Wildlife is saying we want to be able to bypass this Colorado law and allow for simulated guns to be in our school to show them how to load, point, and shoot on school property. That could be an elementary school. It could be a middle school. It could be a high school. Now, the law says, you can't even bring them on vocational schools. But the lobbyists approached the bill sponsors and they said, well, we don't want that. So the bill sponsors took out vocational schools. Vocational schools didn't want to have anything to do with it. This bill is unnecessary because, as we heard from other members, is that we are a local control state as it relates to public education. We don't need a statute to tell or to give permission for a school district to do this. They can do it if they want to, but it sends a very mixed message when we put it in statute that says, okay, we have school safety policies that says don't bring a gun to school, but yet it's okay if you're a hunter because we have declining sales and revenue because we're trying to create that next generation of hunters. Yeah, I'm okay, but why do we have to put kids in the middle of this? So when I think about Colorado and what's going on nationally, we had Columbine. Columbine, as you know, was a school shooting. I'm trying to think how many students. I think that was 13 were killed in Columbine and 24 was injured. And besides that school, we also had Arapahoe County High School had a shooting, Deer Creek Middle School had a shooting, and Platte County High School had a shooting. Of course, we know about the Aurora Theater shooting, King Soopers shooting in Colorado. And so right now, our students are asking lawmakers, the adults, to take actions to make sure that we're creating safe environments for them in schools. If you have a simulator or a fake gun in a school, the first thing a kid is going to say, that guy has a gun. Somebody has a gun. And when people see guns, they're not going to check to see if it's fake or if it's real. They're going to take cover. They're going to hide. It's unfortunate that our kids are having to do these active shooter drills, but yet we're going to take instructional time. Remember, 10 hours is the minimum. An elective course could be up to a whole semester. We're going to use elective time, credit, course credit, for you to obtain a hunter's license and to get hunter's education. I think that is the wrong approach to be able to use our schools and our kids this way. We have a beautiful state. I talked about it already, and I looked at what people are hunting.
Senator Fields, would you like to go into your second 10 minutes?
I would, Mr. President.
Terrific.
People are hunting elk. They're hunting deer. They're hunting moose. They're hunting bears. They're hunting the bighorn sheep. They're also hunting, you know, maybe you can do rabbits and maybe wild turkeys. You know, there's other things that people hunt. And if fine, go online, take a course, get your hunter's license, and go ahead and shoot and hunt. But to have this training on our school property, when the law clearly states you're not supposed to have a gun, but we do have local control for public education, so there's a way for them to bypass decades and decades of work, 20 years since Columbine. And we want to reintroduce guns in schools to protect the revenue and the reduction of licensors. Let me tell you what's going on. Let's see what's going on. Did you know that in Colorado, we have a high suicide rate, one of the highest in the country? And you know what they're using to commit suicide, especially our boys? It's guns. And you're going to have a certified Colorado Parks and Wildlife instructor teach hunter safety to a kid who may have been depressed or may have been sad too long. Do they understand the red flags in this hunting education class to know that this might not be appropriate for you to be involved with this curriculum, because you might end up committing homicide and suicide? Now, you might know how to shoot and aim and handle a gun safely, which is what the class is all about. But does that instructor really know how to manage a kid that might be using this as an opportunity to ambush or to premeditate a school shooting? Because now you've given him not only the intellect, knowledge to how to handle a gun, they get an opportunity to see how they can do that in their schools in an inappropriate way. Guns are used to commit suicide. The statistics do I have here? Oh, here's one. %91 of deaths in children is based on a firearm. You might come to school and play with one, but when you go home, who knows if that gun is properly stored? You taught them how to use the gun, and they go and they see a gun, and they bring that real gun to school. These are preventable measures, and that's what we should be doing in the state of Colorado. We should be ensuring that we are creating safe environments for our kids. And for me, that means that we should not be using classroom grounds and property involving guns. We need to be protecting our kids from gun violence. Go online. I went online, but I wasn't going to pay it because I'm not interested in hunting, but I know lots of people are. I looked at the numbers. The numbers are very impressive when you look at the overall numbers of people who are hunting. The numbers are strong. We're not the number one state. I think Texas is the number one state. I don't know where we fall, but we're not up there. And we are seeing a decline in hunting within the state of Colorado. And so this is just an easy switch and bait. Let's give our kids guns in schools. Let's teach them how to hunt an animal. And then all the other additional things that the sponsors talked about. Remember, it's a 10-hour course, but they want to include other things that are good content to learn. It's about the hands-on activity and the simulation with the gun that is troublesome to me. That's not what the nation is doing right now. That's not what we should be doing in the state of Colorado. And by saying no on this bill, which is where I stand, doesn't mean that we're going to stop hunter education in the state of Colorado. It's not going to stop, because remember, schools can choose in or out. And this need is already being addressed for families and for kids. If the family and the child wants that, they can explore that, and that can be accomplished. It doesn't have to be done on our school property. So I'm going to close there, Mr. President, and I am urging all of you, for the safety of our kids, that you vote no on this hunter education bill, HB 1168.
Senator Winter.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I very much appreciate the comments from the good senator from Aurora, and I share many of her concerns around school safety and suicides and accidental gun violence, which is why I've made sure my children have had hunter safety classes, because I make sure when my children go over to someone else's house, I ask if they have guns or a loaded weapon, but I don't know for sure. And I don't want my children to think that those guns are toys. And when they went to these classes, they actually understood the seriousness of what a gun can and cannot do. When we talk about suicide rates, we know that suicide is going to be less successful when a gun's not used. And understanding the seriousness of a gun as a young person is really important if you're facing mental health issues. When you understand that a gun isn't a toy, and maybe it is brought into school, you understand the importance of reporting it. My children know if they ever see a gun, to tell the adult in the home there's a gun. And they learn that through me, but they also learn that through very serious hunter education courses. Now, my children don't hunt. My husband does. My daughter's basically a vegetarian. She'll never kill anything. But she understands what a gun can do and the power of a gun. And this is optional. So 2 months ago, my son came home and had a form and said, "Mom, you're not signing me out of sex education, are you?" Because he's in 7th grade. I said, "Absolutely not. I actually sat through a 14.5-hour long hearing to make sure you got that curriculum on sex education. And not only are you going to it, you're going to report back to me what you learned about sex education. You're going to tell me what they're teaching. You're going to tell me how they're teaching you how to be responsible." And I had that same conversation with them around gun safety. I've had that same conversation with them around climate change. Because I believe that avoiding hard conversations with our children doesn't actually lead to avoidance. So my worldview, I want my children to know how to use condoms. I also want them to know how to put down a gun because of how serious it is. And that is important to me. this is optional. It's optional by the school districts. It's optional by the parents. And I think if we had more children that understood the seriousness of a gun, we'd have a safer society. And we are in a society where I've supported all the gun safety legislation we've had here. I've supported making sure that domestic abusers don't have guns. I've supported background checks. And also, there's still guns around. And I know that at some point, my children are going to be in a home with a gun. And part of making sure that they're safe is telling them how serious it is, telling them how to use it, if and when how to use it. And so, if we're teaching our children about all the serious things, from sex education to climate change to gun safety, and that's why I support this bill.
Senator Story.
Thank you, Mr. President. I also stand in opposition to House Bill 1168, and I appreciate the words shared just now by the good senator from Westminster, and that she is a very engaged and proactive parent. I appreciate that she wanted her kids to have gun safety education. I think that's a great plan. And I think it's a great idea for anyone who feels the same way as she does in wanting to educate her kids about the importance and the dangers of weapons. And it's important for people who also want to get hunter's licenses and youth that might be experiencing that with their families. But it doesn't have to be on the campuses of our public education schools, and it shouldn't be. We have had our share in Colorado of gun violence on school campuses, and it has been raging across our country for decades. I see absolutely no reason to have hunting education on our school campuses, and the handling of a gun and the safety of a gun, or anything that has anything to do with guns is part of our curriculum. There are gun safety classes in numerous places, locations around the state where hunter education can occur and licenses can be obtained, and it does not need to happen on our public school campuses. And so I stand in strong opposition to House Bill 1168.
Senator Donovan.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, colleagues. I rise in support of this bill for probably too many reasons to enumerate at the mic. But a couple important pieces, I think. One, the chance at education around this course being taught in our public schools in an elective type situation by trusted faces and trusted individuals will not result in a hunting license, because of course you have to do live fire. That's a critical component of getting your hunting license, and that's going to happen after you've gone through this course if you choose to continue to that, if you want to do live fire. I hope a lot of people choose to do the live fire portion of this course because my grandfather had many sayings, because he was a grandfather, and you have to have sayings when you're a grandfather. But one of his sayings was if you're in a group of people and there are firearms around, the most unsafe person, the riskiest individual, is the person who's handled the firearm the least or knows the least about guns. That's who you really need to pay attention to if you're in a group setting of guns or if you're going hunting with someone. And so I think this program would provide a great opportunity for folks to learn about gun safety. And you do have to handle guns and be exposed to them and be taught. Gun safety is not intuitive. And you certainly don't want to learn gun safety by picking up a gun and learning gun safety. You need to be taught by experts who have had experience and have been through it and know it. My grandfather taught me gun safety. Both of my older brothers taught me gun safety. My father taught me gun safety. And then I took hunter's ed. I had to drive to Denver to take my hunter's ed. That was the closest location that I could get in. So even, I think you would think that a place like Eagle County would have hunter's ed. Nope, had to come down to the big city, to actually the really cool CPW facility up on the north side of town, and did my live fire there, as well as the course. It was really fun. It was a great day. It was a diverse group of people. I made friends. We all shared stories. Some people were there because they wanted to learn about guns. Some people were there to get their hunting license. But the other part of this bill that I am enthusiastic supportive of is because for a number of years now, you guys have heard me come to the mic and give a now tired refrain of we are loving our public lands to death. And how do we start to teach people how to get out in the woods and responsibly be out there? My often now tired example is we are hiring people and finding volunteers to remove bags of human waste from trailheads because people don't even have that initial level of education to know how to correctly poop in the woods. Things that I didn't anticipate I would say at the mic when I initially ran for Senate, right? Not the noble debate of democracy that I anticipated, but alas, here we rise. We bring problems to the mic. They're also trashing our environment. They also don't know respectful distances to stay away from animals. They also don't understand that their recreation has impact. Guess what this book teaches you? All of those really neat concepts. They also don't know how to call for help if they were lost in the woods. They don't know the risks of hypothermia. Talk to search and rescue people. You know why you will shortly hear a bill about search and rescue, because we keep encouraging people out to get in the woods and they don't know how to. And so the hunter education course material is a really great opportunity for people to learn about all these things, because that's what it teaches you. It teaches you, chapter 5 is a remarkable chapter about carrying capacity and winter habitat loss. There's a diagram in here that feels like it probably comes more from Edward Abbey and perhaps the Monkey Wrench Gang than the hunting community that shows a bulldozer cutting down wildlife habitat and building it for another condo development, and the condo development is called Wildlife View Condos. So just a great resource for people to use if they so choose in their public school to learn more about our natural environment. Yes, guns in schools are scary, and it sure is a sad commentary on our nation that guns in schools are something that we talk about with such violence. But I would like to refine that, and I would say violence via guns in our schools is scary, because I think we need to focus on the behavior of the individual, not the tool that's used to implement that behavior. So yes, guns in schools can be scary, but it's really the action of the person with that gun that's scary. And I do believe that we, on both sides of this issue of how you view a gun, can do a better job of listening to the other side. And I've learned that by marrying a city boy. And he taught me that he grew up with a gun was scary, that was murder, that was violence. I grew up with a gun was black powder hunting and some of my best memories. And one of the neatest things my dad ever gave to me was when he handed down a family black powder gun to me. We viewed this thing very differently, and by having discussions with each other, we've learned to appreciate the other person's perspective. And that's allowed us to have much better conversations about gun safety and gun violence in this nation. I think that this course maybe could also provide that opportunity for people to focus on the behavior that's associated with the gun, not the gun itself. So I appreciate the sponsors carrying this bill. I know it's been a bill that's been in discussions for years to get it to the right place. I think it really is to the right place this year. And I hope that the students who take this course and the volunteers that teach it walk out with, yes, some knowledge of how to safely operate guns. I hope they learn to distinguish between a black powder and a rifle. I hope they learn the difference between a bullet and a cartridge. But I also hope that they learn how to turn over a boat and avoid hypothermia. I also hope they learn the difference between a male and female turkey and even what those are called. I hope they learn winter range. I hope they learn safe foraging. I hope they learn how hard it is to hunt a turkey. All these things that are the heritage of Colorado can be learned via a hunter education course. And I ask for your aye vote. Thank you.
Senator Donovan, I'm looking forward to your lunch and learn on how to poop in the woods. Senator Heisey.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like
bag
to
lunch.
bring a little, I think, more accurate information than perhaps we may have heard earlier. I understand that the thought of hunting produces a visceral reaction in some people. Most people would prefer that the first time they see their meat, it's in a tidy little package, clear cellophane over the top, that little diaper thing underneath to soak up any juices that might make you not want to buy that package. But my wife included, by the way. But that's really not where meat comes from, and so for some of us that don't mind processing our own game, hunting is kind of the next level out there. However, even if you take this course and do the live fire, you don't get a hunting license. You get a little card, mine's orange, I think my kid's was yellow, that says, I have passed the hunter safety course. Now, if I want to buy a license, I have to provide them with the number off of that card. I assume they check it against their database. And then I can purchase a hunting license to hunt whichever particular manner of game I want to hunt. So if I'm hunting deer and elk, and oh, by the way, coyotes are a real problem, so perhaps I'm doing some predator hunting, I have a different license for each one of those, and I grouse about it every year because the Division of Wildlife has seen fit to raise the price, $10 or so over the last 25 years. Probably not keeping up with inflation. However, most of the hunters in Colorado are still local hunters. Most of the money that DOW receives comes from the out-of-state hunters. So while I have complained about the various license plates I see when I'm out there hunting, I have learned to quit complaining about that because they are the ones that are funding DOW, which is really, I think, Parks and Wildlife or something now. So they are funding the habitat. They're funding the wardens out there that are making sure we're hunting ethically. So when you go through this hunter safety course, it doesn't make you a good hunter. Really, it doesn't even make you a bad hunter. It makes you a hunter that knows how to hunt ethically. So to say that this makes hunters and you get a license when you're done hunting is really not the case. Another comment we heard is when they come from playing with guns in school. Now, currently it's illegal. It's against school policy for you to have a gun in a school, even one with a little orange tip on it. So we've heard the stories of people being expelled for bringing a toy gun. So I have to assume the speaker was talking about the hunter safety course, which they will not have live fire guns, but they will have guns there. You will not be playing with guns in a hunter safety course. That is a promise. You will absolutely be taught to respect this gun, to always know where the barrel's pointed, to always treat it as if it's loaded. Keep your finger off the trigger until you're ready to pull it. You will not be playing with guns in a school. I urge you to vote yes on this bill.
Minority Leader Holbert.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise in support, and it's fascinating. Here we are again seeing folks from both sides of the aisle expressing support. Thank you. Not a lot to add. I thank my friend from Vail and others who have talked about what the hunter safety course actually involves, but one of the things I haven't heard is a respect and understanding for private property ownership rights. I talked on second reading that one of the things that students learn in hunter education is leave a gate in the same condition that you found it. A farmer, rancher may have reason to leave a gate open so that stock might be able to move from one place to another, or to keep that gate closed to prevent exactly that. That's one little example. Back in the 1980s, late 80s, my father and I had access to a 10,000-acre private ranch up by Meeker. Very popular elk hunting location. The landowner allowed us to pitch our walled tent with a wood stove in it for about a week, and we had a great time. But during that hunting trip, the ranch hands, along with a DOW officer, observed two people come in a back gate. Didn't have permission. The ranch hand spotted them from a high point on the property and, what's that vehicle doing coming in through that back gate? The two men in the vehicle were in pursuit of a spike bull elk. At least that year, that was not a legal animal to shoot. Those two people harvested that animal on private property without permission. Those two people lost their vehicle, their firearms, their hunting rights, right there that day. The ranch contacted DOW, officers came out to the property, arrested those individuals, confiscated their personal property, and they went to court or before a judge. I don't know how that story ended, but I was there that day. People who disrespected private property, harvested an animal that was not legal to harvest, got caught and lost everything. I would much rather have my sons or your kids or anyone else's children understand those realities in a class rather than learning them firsthand. The two people, I didn't come in contact with them, but I understood from the ranch hands that they were very apologetic when they realized they'd been caught. There was a lot of, I think, we didn't know. We didn't. But ignorance is no defense. They were guilty. And I would rather have people young or old learn those lessons in a classroom and understand what hunting is and what it is not, legal hunting. I would rather have students learn that you don't ever aim a weapon over or shoot a weapon, rifle, handgun, bow. I'm an archery hunter. You don't aim any weapon over a road or a pathway. You don't do that. Why? You might end up killing somebody. Don't do that. I would rather have students learn those things in a classroom than firsthand out in the field. That's safer for everyone. As my friend from Vail mentioned, I would rather have students learn first aid and what altitude sickness means. I have climbed 39 of the official 54 14ers, and I refer to myself as an archery hunter. That really translates as I hike around with my bow a lot and pay money for a license to do that. I think sometimes maybe those of us who hike 14ers ought to pay for access that way, but typically we don't. But I'd rather have students learn about things like altitude sickness in a classroom than standing on a trail, like the many, many people I have encountered while hunting, carrying my bow around in the woods, or climbing 14ers. Have you found someone out in the wilderness who is suffering from altitude sickness? I have. I met a man on Grays and Torreys from San Diego who was stumbling around confused and couldn't understand why he was in such pain, but he knew he was in such pain but couldn't understand it, and he was caught in that infinite loop of misery and confusion because he was suffering from altitude sickness. My climbing partner and I sat him down, got water into him, gave him some caffeine, gave him some aspirin, started walking him down the mountain, and he started to recover. I would rather have students learn those things in a classroom than firsthand, because you might end up dead. People die. But if you understand those things and can take care of yourself and others out in the wilderness, if you can understand that hunting isn't about killing, if you're not a hunter, you might say, oh, it is. No, there is that moment, rare, that you actually are able to harvest an animal, like a deer or an elk. But then you understand that's where the work begins. You may have spent hours or days getting to that location, moving equipment into that remote facility. You may have spent days looking for animals, hiking up and down, and then you finally get to harvest that animal, but that's where the work begins. Now you have a deer that might be a few hundred pounds or an elk several hundred pounds. What do? How do you process that meat? If you've had deer or elk meat and you think, oh, it tastes gamey, I don't really like it, I assure you it was not processed efficiently and probably correctly. One of the things the Department of Wildlife here in Colorado made available years ago is a DVD called Down to the Bone. And if you want to learn how to take a deer or elk and dress it completely, leave all the bones on the ground, and take all of the meat out with you, purchase a copy of Down to the Bone, and two gentlemen who are butchers and hunters will teach you exactly how to do that. If you have all of the meat off of the animal and in a cooler or a refrigerator within hours the same day, that's what I do. I can do that under my back deck at home. My sons have done that. We have the meat in the refrigerator the same day we harvest the animal, and then the next day we do all the butchering ourselves. If you want to understand the value that a son or daughter puts in harvesting that animal and then going to the freezer and taking a piece of meat out, defrosting it, and coming up with a recipe. My sons cook their own wild game, and it tastes amazing. It's not a gamey taste. Why? We process it correctly. How do we know how to do that? Hunter education. The Department of Parks and Wildlife. DNR, Natural Resources, if I got that wrong, division. But they teach people how to do this. And the idea that we should exclude that from schools, if the school board wants to do it, they don't have to. I understand concerns. But I assure you, having more of our sons and daughters, more of our youth, understand what it is versus what it isn't. to understand how precious life is, and that life isn't like a video game or a movie. It's real. The discovery that my two sons went through when they harvested their first deer, in both cases a doe, at fairly close range, but to understand that animal was walking around and they were looking at its beauty, and then the next moment they were processing that animal. The next day, butchering that animal. And for months, maybe a year afterwards, enjoying the harvest of that animal. Nothing, members, nothing will help young people understand how precious that life is, how precious that resource is, and to respect life, to shun the idea of using any sort of weapon recklessly, to honor private property ownership rights, to understand that if you attempt to harvest an animal and it jumps over a fence on a private property, that doesn't give you permission to go trespass.
Mr. Minority Leader, would you like to go into your next 10 minutes?
Yes, Mr. President. Well, I'm almost done, but yes, sir, I will. I won't make another trip. Members, I wish I could convey the pride and the experience of a parent who has watched two sons learn these things, and the anticipation that I have someday maybe having grandchildren, and that my sons would teach that next generation. This is not something to be afraid of. It is something that is woefully absent in our society, and I thank the bill sponsors. A bipartisan bill in both chambers. Thank you for being brave to stand up and say, this makes sense, this is good policy. I ask for an aye vote, and thank you again for bringing the bill. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Smallwood.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, colleagues. I, too, rise in support of House Bill 1168 and hope you join me with an aye vote on this bill. I think Colorado is a uniquely, maybe perhaps uniquely important state because of really who we are, because people are drawn to Colorado for those outdoor activities, and hunting is definitely one of them. But because hunting is one of them, you know, people are arriving in our state, tourists are arriving in our state, and firearms are arriving in our state. And to think that our young people can't benefit from that type of exposure candidly strikes me as being a little bit naive. I mean, guns exist in our society, and to provide school districts who choose to help educate young people about their existence and about how dangerous they can be, it's something that I would really hope that more school districts choose to take advantage of. I appreciate the comments from the senator from Westminster, who's talking about the fact that she had her children take hunter safety, even though, if I understood correctly, they have no intention of having guns, perhaps using guns, certainly not hunting. And I was the exact same as a father when my kids were very young. My wife was born and raised on a farm. The kids were out at the farm all the time. And if you've been on a farm or on a ranch, guess what you're more than likely to find? You're more than likely to find firearms. And as a father of 3 boys who were adventurous and rambunctious and curious, the last thing I wanted was them seeing a shotgun or a rifle or a handgun and say, oh, this looks interesting. Let's take this out. Let's play with this. Let's mess around with this. And I did my best as a parent, and my wife did her best as a parent to make sure that we were educating our kids about that. But you know, we're the parents, right? So you know how much weight that carries in the mind of a young boy, right? We don't know what we're talking about. So I very much appreciate those comments because we were the same. I made sure my kids took hunter safety for that reason. I wanted them to be taught and educated by professionals, for them to have that exposure from other adults, from ideally other role models, so that they would know the importance of gun safety, to where when they're at a friend's house or at a neighbor's house or out at the farm or out on a ranch, that when they came across a gun, they would know, A, if it's not in the right place, to let an adult know, right? If somebody had left a firearm someplace, that was of utmost concern for us, which I'm sure does happen, right? People are cleaning a gun, something like that, and aren't being safe with it. I wanted my kids to be one of those that would come to us right away and say, hey, look, there's a gun over here. We know that's not safe. We know that's not where it belongs. Or more importantly for me, knowing the way boys are, is that if they're at a friend's house, at a neighbor's house, and they come across a gun, the last thing I wanted was them to pick it up themselves, or to have one of those other kids pick it up and say, hey, shouldn't we go play with this? Shouldn't we mess around with this? I was really trying to hope that my kids would come away knowing, no, you need to immediately go talk to an adult about it. So to assume that because you're not a sportsman, sports person a word, or a hunter, or a sports shooter, to assume that if you're the kind of person that won't have guns in your house or at your friend's house, to assume that your kids will never come across them is perhaps a bit misguided in society. So I really like the idea. I really like the flexibility that's built into this proposed legislation. I want to thank both of the bill sponsors for doing their homework on it, for making sure that stakeholders, as best as possible, were engaged on it, and I'd ask for your aye vote on House Bill 1168.
Senator Janal.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I really appreciate the robust discussion that we've had here today on third reading of House Bill 1168. And I wanted to share with you a couple of things. We were talking about family, and on both sides of the aisle, and how taking kids out, hunting, or just practice shooting, things of that nature, learning the respect for this instrument. It is very important. And this is what hunter education is all about when we teach it in the curriculum of schools. My dad, as you all well know, was a police officer. And as a little girl, my dad did not take me out hunting. My dad showed me his gun when he came home one night, and he put it out on the table and he said, "Do you see this? This is a weapon, and you should be very scared of it, and you should never, ever, ever touch this, ever." And from that point on, when I was a little girl until I was in my 50s, I was scared of guns. And I shouldn't have been scared of guns. I should have realized and respected them and understood what they could and could not do. But I didn't. I was kind of like the good senator from Vail's husband, coming from an urban area, and my dad did not teach me what your parents did, and I wish you did. So I took a concealed course carry course, sorry, in my 50s, so that I would know how to respect guns, care about them, fire them, know how to use them. It was very beneficial. I also do a lot of hiking in backcountry, and that's where I believe that I wanted to have one in case I needed it at some point in time. But I respect the comments of the good senator from Aurora. I know where you're coming from. I also want to thank all of the comments of support from various angles. It was really interesting to hear all of your personal stories and share them. I also was sitting there listening to you all, and we were talking about this particular issue, but we also have education for driver's ed, because I was always taught in driver's ed that a car was a weapon, and you need to learn how to drive a car in the safest way possible. And I think that young students who want to take this course will learn not just respect and responsibility, but how to handle something that is a potential weapon, just like a car. And so I really am thankful for all of your comments, and just want to reiterate that this bill allows, but it doesn't require, Colorado schools to offer Hunter Ed as an elective course. And the course is taught by CPW, certified instructors, very well trained, and parental consent would be required for any type of hands-on activity. This gives kids who may not ever have that chance the opportunity to take a course and learn a lot about the outdoors and respect for wildlife and how to handle a gun safely. So I hope that you will support me in House Bill 1168.
The motion is the passage of House Bill 1168. Are there any no votes? Senators Jaquez Lewis, Fields, Story. With 30 ayes, 3 noes, 0 absent, 2 excused, House Bill 1168 is passed. Co-sponsors: Senators Bridges, Henriksen, Winter, Donovan, Minority Leader Holbert, Cook, Smallwood, Kirkmeyer, Sonnenberg, Liston, Gardner, Lundin, Simpson, Heisey, Priola, Scott. Please add the president. Will the clerk please read the title to Senate Bill 97?
Senate Bill 97, Senators Pedersen and Rodriguez, Representatives Harrod and Sullivan, concerning the expansion of protections for workers who risk workplace health and safety concerns, and in connection therewith making an appropriation.
Senator Rodriguez.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move Senate Bill 97 on third reading and final passage.
Senator Smallwood.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, colleagues. I talked about this a little bit during second reading, but there was almost nobody here, so I figure it's probably worth going through this again. I've not had an opportunity to speak with the supporters about kind of their thoughts on where this came from and why we think it's important, but I do know that it's to me anyways, a little interesting to be changing the wording in Title 8, 14.4102. So for those of you who were here during the pandemic, which I believe was most of you, my memory serves me correctly, we passed a bill providing for the first time rights to workers related to a public health emergency. So if I remember the situation correctly, there was a concern during the height of the pandemic that there were employers who were acting improperly during the pandemic, that they were encouraging workers or coercing workers or forcing workers to sort of do their job in an unsafe environment. Unsafe environment related to the public health emergency. So if you look at the title of 8-14.4-101, the entire title is Worker Rights Related to a Public Health Emergency. So if I remember correctly, folks came to us and said, we really need to support these workers who are doing the right things in light of a pandemic. This wasn't something that we needed to do before, but now we're in a pandemic. We need to make changes. So we need to establish these whistleblower rules and talk about the division's enforcement of what those will be like, have the employer post these rights, provide laws around the relief of the aggrieved person and relief authorized, and the whistleblower enforcements. And I'm sure most of you clearly remember I was opposed to the bill then, primarily on two grounds. One was that I felt the language in the bill included things that were a little bit vague. And it seemed, I want to say unconscionable, it seemed interesting, certainly a bit illogical to me, that in the event a whistleblower brings the action, the division finds that there's a concern, all of the money that would be charged to the employer under this, 75% of it goes right back to the government. 25% goes to the whistleblower for putting their neck on the line and being the whistleblower. It just didn't seem logical. So I stood here and I complained about it. Memory serves me correctly, and I voted no, and enough of you voted yes to where it became a law. And we established 8-14.4, which is worker rights related to a public health emergency. So now, this year, we have another bill going right back into the same section, adding more money, adding more people to the government rolls, 5 or 6 FTEs if I remember correctly, in order to do what? The way I see it, colleagues, is if you look on the engrossed bill, page 2, line 9, and line 16. That really seems to be the entire foundation of the bill, is to strike 6 words on each of those lines. We're striking out related to a public health emergency. So again, the title of the article, Worker Rights Related to a Public Health Emergency, and now we're just saying these are just now going to be new worker rights. So now, unlike when we passed the bill last time, this has nothing to do with a public health emergency. Now we're saying that a principal shall not discriminate, shall not take adverse action, or retaliate against any worker based on the worker in good faith, raising any reasonable concern, which isn't defined, of course, about workplace violations of government health or safety rules, which I agree with, or the magic "or" that we put in bills all the time, about an otherwise significant workplace threat to health or safety. That's the vague language that I didn't like when we passed this last time. I'm on board with we want to protect workers when their employer is doing things that are against government rules and putting other workers in danger. I agree with that. But we have to drop the "or" in, which basically just says, or anything else that somebody feels is important. So now we can bring the government back in, we can bring all the lawyers back in, because somebody feels that there is a significant threat to health or safety, which could be defined, in my opinion, as darn near anything. But now what's interesting is we struck out completely related to a public health emergency, which was exactly what everybody was telling us when we passed this bill last time, why we need to pass it, because we're in a public health emergency. And now we're going to just strike that language in both places. So now, colleagues, this is no longer an article about worker rights related to a public health emergency. This is just brand new, more worker just because rights, which apparently hasn't been important enough for the last 140 some years for us to try to address. We addressed it under, I don't want to say the guise, because I don't think there's any subterfuge going on here, the guise of a public health emergency, but it does raise a few concerns to now see us all of a sudden magically strike out the words public health emergency, and now we have another garden variety worker rights bill, and to boot 5 or 6 new government employees to manage all of this, as if our government wasn't big enough, and hundreds of thousands of taxpayer dollars to enforce what can be any workplace threat that a worker themselves, with no definition, deems to be, quote, significant. So I view this as being really unnecessary. I view it as insult to injury to tell that whistleblower, hey, thanks for putting your neck on the line. If and when an employer gets fined, the government's going to take 75% of all the money through enforcement actions. Are we kidding? I'd encourage a no vote on Senate Bill 97.
Seeing no further discussion, the motion is for the adoption of Senate Bill 97. Are there any no votes? Senators Zenzinger, Sonnenberg, Heisey, Simpson, Lundin, Gardner, Kirkmeyer, Smallwood, Cook, Minority Leader Holbert, Scott, Woodward,
Thank you.
no votes on Senate Bill 97. Liston, with 20 aye votes, 13 no, 0 absent, 2 excused, Senate Bill 97 is passed. Co-sponsors, Senate Bill 97. Majority Leader Moreno. Senators Lee, Jaquez Lewis, Buckner, Winter, Kolker, Story, Danielson, please add the president. Will the clerk please read the title to House Bill 1049?
House Bill 1049, Representatives Bacon and Rick, Senators Pedersen and Bridges, concerning prohibiting a post-secondary institution from making payment of an outstanding balance on a student's account, a condition of issuing the student's documents.
Senator Pedersen.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move House Bill 1049 on third reading and final passage.
Is there any discussion? Seeing none, the motion is the adoption of House Bill 1049. Are there any no votes? Senators Lundin, Minority Leader Holbert, Cook, Priola, Smallwood, Kirkmeyer, Liston, Gardner, Simpson, Heisey, Sonnenberg, Scott, Woodward. With 20 ayes, 13 no, 0 absent, 2 excused, House Bill 1049 is passed. Co-sponsors, Senators Jaquez Lewis, Hendrickson, Majority Leader Moreno, Gonzalez, Winter, Buckner, Lee, Fields, Danielson, Hanson, Coleman, Story. Please add the president. General orders. Second reading of bills, consent calendar.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move the Senate resolve itself into the Committee of the Whole for the consideration of general orders, second reading of bills, consent calendar.
You have heard the excellent motion. All those in favor say aye. Opposed, no. The motion is adopted and the Senate will resolve itself into the Committee of the Whole for the consideration of the general orders, second reading of bills, consent calendar, and Senator Henriksen will take the chair.
The committee will come to order and the court rule is relaxed. Majority Leader Moreno.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move to lay over House Bill 1153 to tomorrow, Wednesday, March 30th.
The motion is to lay over House Bill 1153. Is there any discussion? All those in favor say aye. All opposed, no. The ayes have it, and House Bill 1153 is laid over until tomorrow, March 30th, 2022. Will the clerk please read the title of the remaining bill on the general order, second reading of bills, consent calendar?
House Bill 1226, Representatives Tipper and Carver, Senators Huckus, Lewis, and Cook, concerning the continuation of licensing requirements for massage therapists and in connection therewith, implementing the recommendations of the 2021 Sunset Report by the Department of Regulatory Agencies.
Majority Leader Moreno.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move for the passage of the one bill on the second reading consent calendar, which includes House Bill 1226.
Is there any discussion of the bill on the consent calendar? The motion before the body is the adoption of the bill on the general order, second reading of bills, consent calendar. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. The ayes have it, and the bill is adopted. Majority Leader Moreno.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move the committee rise and report.
The motion is for the committee to rise and report. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. The ayes have it, and the motion is adopted. The committee will rise and report.
He's on his way. He's on his way.
The Senate will come to order. Senator Henriksen.
Thank you, Mr. President. The committee has had a bill under consideration. Will the clerk please read the report?
Mr. President, your Committee of the Whole begs leave to report it has had under consideration the following attached bills, being the second reading thereof, and makes the following recommendations thereon. House Bill 1226 passed on second reading and ordered revised and placed on the calendar for third reading and final passage. House Bill 1153 laid over until 3/30/2022 and retaining its place on the calendar.
Senator Henriksen.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move the Senate resolve itself in the Committee of Whole.
Senator Henriksen, will you move the report?
Thank you, Mr. President. I move the adoption of the committee report.
The motion is the adoption of the Committee of the Whole report. Are there any no votes? With a vote of 33 ayes, 0 noes, 0 absent, 2 excused, the Committee of the Whole report is adopted. House Bill 1226 passed on second reading in order revised and placed on the calendar for third reading and final passage. House Bill 1153 laid over until 3/30/2022 and retaining its place on the calendar. General Order, second reading of bill. Senator Henriksen.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move the Senate resolve itself into the Committee of the Whole for the consideration of general orders, second reading of bills.
You have heard the motion. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed, no. The ayes have it, and the motion is adopted. The Senate will resolve itself in the Committee of the Whole for the consideration of the general orders, second reading of bills, and Senator Henderson will take the chair.
The committee will come to order and the court rule is relaxed. Will the clerk please read the title to House Bill 22-1226? Majority Leader Moreno.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move to lay over House Bill 1089, House Bill 1165, and Senate Bill 114 to tomorrow, Wednesday, March 30th.
The motion is to lay over House Bill 1089, House Bill 1165, and Senate Bill 114 to tomorrow, March 30th. All those in favor say aye. All opposed, no. The ayes have it, and the bills are laid over. Will the clerk please read the title to House Bill 1226? 12.
1226 is on. We're not regular.
Okay. Will the clerk please read the title to House Bill 1252?
House Bill 1252, Representative Burnett, Senators Kirkmeyer and Hawkes Lewis, concerning provisions of public school contracts and in connection therewith, specifying requirements and limitations for such provisions.
Senator Hawkes Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My co-prime and I would love to present to you House Bill 1252. I'll briefly describe the problem that was brought to us. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes.
There a motion for the committee?
Thank you. Yes. Let me move it. I would like to move House Bill 1252, and we had to amend it. I move, and the education report.
The motion is the adoption of the Education Committee report. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, the motion is the adoption of the Education Committee report. All in favor say aye. All opposed, no. The ayes have it, and the committee report is adopted. To the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this bill was brought to us by St. Vrain School District, and I'll just briefly describe the problem, and my co-prime can add in her extensive knowledge on the procurement process if she cares to. The problem is that school districts right now are facing contracts from many different vendors. Several of them are headquartered outside of Colorado, and so therefore their standard contracts may not take into account Colorado's data privacy laws. And so this was a fix that was brought to us and endorsed by several of the different school groups, Colorado Rural School Alliance, CASB, and several other school district groups.
Senator Kirkmeyer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's a procurement bill. We love it. Everyone should support it. You've heard me all talk about procurement and the importance of procurement. Quite frankly, what this bill does is it codifies existing laws and rules pertaining to school district contracts with third-party vendors and centralizes the various legal guidance into one place in the statute, and that would be the procurement statute. So it's a great bill. We like it, and we look forward to any discussion.
Senator Zenzinger.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members, I just wanted to talk a little bit about this bill and some of the questions and discussion that we had in committee. First off, I am totally in favor of this bill because I do believe that it will help especially our smaller rural districts that may not have the staff or the capability to put together really strong enforceable contracts. But I also wanted to point out that it does a couple of other things that I believe school districts already do, but I just wanted to make sure that if school districts were entering into a contract, that these contracts would be enforceable. And the good senators that are sponsoring this legislation clarified for me that absolutely this new standard procurement type of contracting process is entirely enforceable. And I wanted to point out that what kinds of contracts are we talking about? It's for three things that are outlined in the legislation, and it's for the purposes to acquire supplies, services, or construction. So those three things are covered by this procurement process, they are enforced by this procurement process, and the local school districts have the ability to enter into these third-party contracts and make sure that whatever they are contracting for will follow the needs of the district. In particular, I want to hone in on the second item, which is services. I clarified whether or not this would cover T&C services, and guess what? It does. So that is one of the reasons why I am supporting this bill today, is because it provides me with great confidence that any T&C services that we may contract with school districts and these third parties will be enforceable, because I heard from constituents and I heard from advocates outside of this chamber that that component is really important to them, in particular for safety of students. So I felt like my questions were answered. I want to thank the good senators for bringing forward what I think is some good clarity on the procurement process for school districts, and I want to thank you very much for bringing this forward today.
Minority Leader Holbert.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I rise in support of 1252, echo the sentiments of the good senator from Arvada. I want to thank the sponsors for bringing the bill. I think during my 12 years in the legislature, 4 years in the House, and all 4 of those years on House education, first 2 years in the Senate, a member of Senate education, I came to really appreciate education policy. But one of the most significant, I think, wise moves I've seen groups outside the Capitol do was right after his term as Speaker ended, former Speaker of the House, Representative Mark Ferrandino, was hired as the Chief Financial Officer, the CFO for the Denver Public School Systems. And I thought that was very wise for a large school district to hire a former legislator who really understood this policy. So I encourage districts to consider that. And in a completely unrelated topic, unrelated to House Bill 1252, if former Senate President Brandon Schaefer happens to be listening, I hope you're well, sir. Ask for an aye vote.
Is there any further discussion on House Bill 1252? Seeing none, the motion before the body is the passage of House Bill 1252 on second reading. All in favor say aye. All opposed, no. The ayes have it, and House Bill 1252 is passed on second reading. Will the clerk please read the title of House Bill 22-1275?
House Bill 1275, Representative McLaughlin and Larson, Senator Fields, concerning the continuation of the School Safety Resource Center Advisory Board and in connection therewith implementing the recommendation in the Department of Regulatory Agencies Sunset Report.
Senator Fields. Senator Fields, you are on mute, either on our end or on yours.
Senatorial 5.
We'll take a senatorial 5. All right, so the discussion is on House Bill 22-1275, and Senator Fields is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move House Bill 1275.
The motion is the passage on second reading of House Bill 1275. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, the motion before the body is the passage. All in favor say aye. All opposed, no. The ayes have it, and House Bill 1275 is passed on second reading. Majority Leader Moreno.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move the committee rise and report.
The motion before the committee is to rise and report. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it, and the committee will rise and report.
The Senate will come to order. Senator Henriksen.
Has met and heard a number of bills under consideration. Will the clerk please read the report?
Mr. President, your committee of the whole begs leave to report that it has had under consideration the following attached bills, being the second reading thereof, and makes the following recommendations thereon. House Bill 1252 is amended. House Bill 1275 passed on second reading, ordered, revised, and placed on the calendar for third reading and final passage. House Bill 1089, House Bill 1165, Senate Bill 114 laid over until 3/30/2022 and retaining their place on the calendar.
Senator Henriksen.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move for the adoption of the report.
The motion is the adoption of the committee of the whole report. Are there any no votes? With a vote of 33 ayes, 0 no, 0 absent, 2 excused, committee of the whole report is adopted. House Bill 1252 as amended, House Bill 1275 passed on second reading, order revised, and placed on the calendar for third reading in final 1165 and Senate Bill 114 laid over until 3/30/2022 and retaining their place on the calendar. Consideration of governor's appointments, consent calendar. Will the clerk please read all the appointments listed on the consent calendar?
Members of the Colorado Commission on Higher Education, effective July 2nd, 2021, for terms expiring July 1st, 2025. Aaron Harbor of Lafayette, Colorado, resident of the 2nd Congressional District and a Democrat appointed. Jim Wilson of Salida, Colorado, resident of the 5th Congressional District and a Republican appointed.
Majority Leader Moreno.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move for the confirmation of all the appointments on the consent calendar, which includes members of the Colorado Commission on Higher Education.
Is there any discussion? Minority Leader Holbert.
Thank you, Mr. President. I want to thank the governor for appointing and former Representative Wilson for accepting the appointment. Representative, the former superintendent of the Salida School District, thank you for continuing to serve the people of Colorado. I hope you and your wife are well, and I know you will do a fabulous job in this position. Ask for an aye vote.
Motion is the confirmation of all the appointments on the consent calendar. Are there any no votes? With 33 ayes, 0 no, 0 absent, 2 excused, all of the appointments are confirmed. Condolences to Representative Wilson. Committee appointments. Will the clerk please read the committee appointment letter to the Legislative Audit Committee?
March 28, 2022, Ms. Natalia Mullins, please be advised that pursuant to Colorado Revised Statute 2-3-101, I am appointing Senator Jeff Bridges to replace Senator Julie Gonzalez to serve on the Legislative Audit Committee effective for April 1st, 2022, upon approval of the Senate. Sincerely, Steve Fenberg, Senate President.
Mr. Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move for the adoption of the appointment to the Legislative Audit Committee.
You have heard the motion, which is the confirmation of Senator Bridges replacing Senator Gonzalez to the Legislative Audit Committee. Are there any no votes? With a vote of 33 ayes, 0 no, 0 absent, 2 excused, the motion is adopted and Senator Bridges is appointed to the Legislative Audit Committee. Committee reports.
March 29, 2022, Committee on Appropriations. After consideration, the merits of the committee recommends the following. House Bill 1247 be referred to the Committee of the Whole. Favorable recommendation with the recommendation that it be placed on the consent calendar. March 29, 2022, the Committee on Appropriations. After consideration on the merits, the committee recommends the following. House Bill 1286 be referred to the Committee of the Whole. Favorable recommendation.
Message from the House.
The House has passed. The House has passed on third reading and transmitted to the Reviser of Statutes House Bill 1031 and 1253, amended as printed in House Journal March 25, 2022. The House has passed on third reading and transmitted to the Reviser of Statutes House Bill 1300 and 1294, amended as printed in House Journal March 28, 2022. The House has passed on third reading and transmitted to the Reviser of Statutes House Bill 1280. The House has passed on third reading and returns herewith Senate Bill 141, 142, and 137. The House has postponed indefinitely Senate Bill 126. The bill is returned herewith.
Message from the Reviser.
We herewith transmit without comment House Bill 1280 without comment as amended House Bill 1031, 1253, 1294, and 1300.
Message from the Governor.
March 18, 2022, to the Honorable Colorado Senate. Ladies and gentlemen, pursuant to the powers conferred upon me by the Constitution and laws of the state of Colorado, I have the honor to designate, appoint, reappoint, and submit to your consideration the following Water Quality Control Commission for a term expiring February 15, 2023. Sonia Chavez of Gunnison, Colorado, as a representative west of the Continental Divide, occasioned by the passing of John Ott, appointed for terms expiring February 15, 2025. April Long of Carbondale, Colorado, as a representative west of the Continental Divide, reappointed. Jenny Arndt of Fort Collins, Colorado, as a representative of the public at large, appointed. Julie Zaring of Alamosa, Colorado, as a representative of the public at large, appointed. Sincerely, Jared Polis, Governor.
Agriculture and Natural Resources. Delivery to the Governor.
To the Governor for signature on Monday, March 28, 2022 at 12:26. Senate Bill 2683, 95, 108, and 115.
Signing of bills.
The President has signed Senate Joint Resolution 007. The President has signed Senate Joint Resolution 009. The President has signed the following House documents: House Bill 1035, 1034, 1039, 1076, 1086, 1088, 1090, 1102, 1110, 1113, 1150, 1266, House Joint Resolution 1015 and 1016. The President has signed House Bill 1117 and 1279.
I have been busy, members. You are welcome. At your service. Announcements. Minority Leader Holbert.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members, can you guess which team in the NHL has the most points in the NHL? Colorado Avalanche. The Colorado Avalanche have 98 points after playing 66 games. I believe that means there's 16 games yet to go, and a total of 32 points still on the line for our Colorado Avalanche. They will be in Calgary tonight to play, I don't know, the Sparks. I can't remember what they're called. What are they? The Flickers? Oh, Flames. At 7 p.m. tonight. If you have the ability to tune in, please do. 7 p.m. tonight. Go Avs!
Senator Buckner.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have consulted with the Majority Leader and the Minority Leader, and I am requesting permission to come in late on Thursday, the 31st, for a doctor's appointment.
Senator Buckner will be marked as excused until she arrives on the 31st.
Okay. I like that. Thank you.
Senator Winter.
Thank you, Mr. President. Transportation and Energy will be meeting at 2 p.m. today. We will be hearing Senate Bill 151, Senate Bill 180, House Bill 1162, and House Bill 1018. See everyone at 2 p.m.
Senator Janal.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Senate Local Government Committee will meet at 2, and we're hearing two bills, Senate Bill 146 and 145.
Senator Coleman.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate State Veteran Military Affairs Committee will be meeting at 2 o'clock in the Old Supreme Court to hear House Bill 1108, Senate Joint Resolution 008, and House Bill 1156 in that order.
Senator Liston.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members,
after committee today, here this afternoon, you had a long, hard day. You're going to be exhausted. Your legs may be weak. Your heart may be beating real fast because of all of the exciting bills and the tough decisions you've had to make. So this afternoon, from roughly 5 o'clock until 8 o'clock, you can make your way down to the University Club, and you'll be in great company because the Emergency Medical Services Association, the EMS people, will be there to take care of you. So if you slip and fall, you will be in great company because they will be able to splint you up immediately. If you have heart palpitations, they'll be able to take care of you. No matter what happens, they'll be able to take care of you. So come down to the U Club from 5 to 8:30 and be in great company by the EMS people. You're all invited. Good food, good friends, and you'll have excellent health care this afternoon. Thank you very much.
Senator Simpson.
Thank you, Mr. President. A moment of personal privilege, please.
Granted.
Colleagues, today is recognition of Vietnam Veterans Memorial Day today. I just ask you all to take a moment and recognize those folks that sacrificed so much for our country with, at the time, very little recognition. I have a personal anecdote. I out of high school, attended the Air Force Academy Preparatory School one year, and our commander was Lieutenant Colonel Ben Pollard, who happened to spend over 2,000 days as a POW in the Hanoi Hilton in Vietnam. And he really left such a lasting impression on me as at that time, a 17-year-old. His stories about his life experiences and his dedication to this country were so touching. You know, he didn't talk about them regularly, and he really waited, you know, till halfway through the term to really share with the rest of the cadet candidates that life experience and then how harrowing it was for him. For over 5 years to be in a POW was just unimaginable, and the experiences that he had. He really touched my heart and my soul, and I still remember Colonel Ben Pollard even today. So I ask you all to recognize the sacrifices that the Vietnam veterans undertook for our country. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Simpson. Further announcements. Majority Leader Moreno.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have one quick announcement that is completely irrelevant to me because I am paperless. But in this year's long bill, House Bill 1329, you'll notice that, colleagues, you will have a fiscal notes packet that will be filed along with House Bill 1329, which is this year's long bill. So you will not find these fiscal notes in the orbital bills with the long bill. Instead, it'll be filed with the long bill, which is House Bill 1329, if you are looking for it. And with that, Mr. President, I move that the Senate stand in recess until 3 p.m. today. Colleagues, you do not need to return. We're just reading bills across the desk.
You've heard the motion. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it, and the Senate will recess until 3 p.m. today.